Have you ever been told that you must be omniscient to know that God does not exist? The idea here being that you basically have to be God to know that there is no God? Well, this is presuming that God is supposed to be omniscient himself. And if God is supposed to be omniscient, then if omniscience is impossible, then it follows that God doesn't exist. And in this video, we're going to be looking at why omniscience is impossible. You're watching For the Love of Wisdom, a YouTube channel on philosophy, free thought, and critical thinking. We're looking at the impossibility of omniscience. So what is omniscience? Omniscience is the full knowledge of everything there is to know. An omniscient being will know everything that anyone at all knows, and an omniscient being will know everything else that it's possible to know. Let's begin with something that looks like it should be a piece of cake for a being as omniscient as God is supposed to be. Here we have my computer monitor, or a facsimile thereof, and my computer monitor can display various images, and I would presume that God would be able to know every single computer image that my monitor can display. So how many images are there? First, we have to consider how many colors each pixel can handle. And each pixel of my monitor can handle colors on a RGB scale, red, green, and blue, ranging from 0 at one end to 255 on the other end. So that's a total of 256 gradations for red, for green, and for blue. And you can get the total number of colors by taking 256 to the third power. So here we'll do that, 256 to the third power is 16,777,216. So I've put that number here. That's the number of colors each pixel on my monitor can represent. Okay, now how many pixels are on the monitor? Well, it's 1680 pixels wide by 1050 pixels tall. So we just multiply these together to get the number of pixels. So let's do that on the calculator here. We have 1680 times 1050, and that gives us 1,764,000. And let's put that on the screen here, 1,764,000. And you'll notice I put it in a smaller font and raised it above the 16 million figure. And that's because this is going to give us how many different possible images my monitor can display. It is 16,777,216 to the power of 1,764,000. That is how many images my computer can display. My computer monitor, I should say. And, well, that's a far cry from one Google. It is much, much larger than one Google, which is just 10 to the 100th power. Now let's get some perspective on this number compared to some real world values. First, let's look at the age of the universe. The universe is approximately 13.82 billion years. So let's figure out how old the how old the universe would be in seconds. Let's get the calculator up here and clear it. So we have 60 seconds in a minute, and 60 minutes in an hour, and 24 hours in a day, and 365.25 days in a year. And we want to multiply that by 13.82 billion. I'm going to go E plus 9. That makes it a billion figure. And this gives us 436 quadrillion 441 trillion 608 billion seconds. That's approximately how many seconds old the universe is. And it's a much smaller figure than the number of images my monitor can display. So here's the age of the universe, as I just mentioned. And this is the number of images my monitor can display. It is a much huger number. In fact, the age of the universe in seconds is such a minuscule fraction of the number of images my monitor can display. It's approximately 5.536 over 10 to the power of 12,744,389. That is a minuscule fraction. It's not even close to 1%. Let's now compare the number of images my monitor can display to the number of atoms in the universe. This is supposed to be somewhere in the range of 10 to the power of 78 to 10 to the power of 82. So the universe has something up to about 10 to the power of 82 atoms in it. And this is still less than one Google, which is far less than the approximately 7.878 times 10 to the power of 12,744,405 images that my monitor can display. So my monitor can display many, many more images than there are atoms in the known universe. Well, let's suppose we multiply the number of atoms by the number of seconds. What we're going to get is something like 4.361 e plus 99, and that is still less than half a Google. So even if the entire universe were some supercomputer dedicated to producing the pictures that could be displayed on my monitor, and it was going at each atom was focusing on a separate series of pictures, and it began from the beginning of the universe, it would still be hardly done at all. Because as you know, the number of images my monitor can display is so much bigger than a Google. These considerations lead me to conclude that omniscience is just physically impossible to anything in the natural world. No matter how much memory there is, no matter how much memory the entire universe could be turned into, it still won't be enough to contain every single image that could be displayed on my computer monitor. And that, of course, is only a fraction of the entire knowledge that an omniscient being would have to know. So nothing at all in the natural universe could be omniscient. If anything at all is omniscient, it's going to be a supernatural being. But we have to consider that noble facts are not just hugely large, much bigger than what can be contained in the natural universe. The facts that can be known are actually infinite. And I'll demonstrate that here. Consider the set of Unicode characters. It covers English characters and European characters, other foreign characters. We have Chinese characters here. We have Korean characters and many other characters. So the Unicode set is this really large set of computer characters representing most of the languages on the earth. Now we could have a string of Unicode characters, and we can have the set of all strings of Unicode characters no matter what that length is. So it starts with a length of 1 and it goes on indefinitely. There's no end to how long it can be. And this is an infinite set. And for every member of this set, it's going to be, well, it's going to be gobbledygook, or it might be something meaningful. Among the meaningful things that will be contained in this set are just about every single book ever written in any language represented by Unicode. There will also be computer programs and recipes and game instructions and even binary representations of images are going to be represented in members of this set. So it's going to be a huge set, an infinite set, I should say, and it's going to contain all kinds of information in it. And for each member of this set, an omniscient being should be able to know if, say, it is something meaningful and coherent in one of the languages that Unicode is used to represent. This being should understand what that work is saying. If it is meaningful and coherent, he should understand whether it's fiction or non-fiction. And if it's non-fiction, whether it's true or partially true, how true is it? There are all these facts that an omniscient being can know about each member of this set, but this is an infinite set. And the problem here is that knowledge is about particulars. You can't build up to an infinite amount of knowledge by adding one piece of knowledge to another. A being could have a vast amount of knowledge. A supernatural being could have a greater amount of knowledge than can be contained in the entire universe. But this knowledge would still be finite. It would still be limited to what you have added one after another. You can't add to infinity. Consider this. Each number is each real number is finite. Infinity is not a real number. There is no, if you count from 1 up, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so on, you're never going to reach infinity. And likewise, if you start with one piece of knowledge and add another piece of knowledge and so on, you're never going to reach omniscience, because omniscience would include knowledge of everything, and that's infinite. So the facts are infinite, but knowledge has to be finite. And since knowledge has to be finite and facts are infinite, omniscience is mathematically impossible. While this demonstrates the mathematical impossibility of omniscience, there is still another angle from which we can look at omniscience and also see, for another reason, why omniscience is impossible. In 1974, Thomas Nagel wrote an article called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" This article is focusing on the idea that there is a phenomenological experience to being a bat that is outside our ability to know about that bat. We can't know what it's like to be a bat. The bat can't know what it's like to be us. Likewise, for any being that has any kind of phenomenological experience, which includes you and me and others, this is privileged information. What it's like to be me is something that ultimately only I can know, and what it's like to be you is something that ultimately only you can know. You can't know what it's like to be me. I can't know in every detail what it's like to be you. I might be able to imagine in some respects what it's like to be you and filter that through the lens of my own experience, but that would not be the same as first-hand knowledge of what it's like to be you. Now, let's say there was some being which incorporated my memories and your memories. That being would not perfectly know what it's like to be me or to be you, because it would filter the information of what it's like to be me through its understanding of what it's like to be you, and vice versa. And so if there is an omnipotent being who can somehow get inside of us and know our experience firsthand, he's not going to just be knowing my experience firsthand, he's going to be knowing your experience firsthand, and so on and so forth. And that is going to contaminate his understanding of my experience and your experience and so on. And of course, his experience of being himself is also going to contaminate that experience. An omniscient being cannot perfectly know what my experience would be like, or your experience, or so on, because he's also going to have the experience of being who he is, and he may know something of your experience and my experience, and so on. And that's not the same as having the experience of being a singular being who does not know what other people's experiences are like. I'm limited. I have various limitations. I'm I have the fear of mortality, which presumably God would not have, and so on. And God cannot perfectly put himself into my place. An omniscient being could not perfectly put himself into my place or in your place. And so an omniscient being, even if we could still intelligibly speak of such a thing, would not have perfect knowledge of what it's like to be me. He would not have perfect knowledge of what it's like to be you. So there is all this privileged information, this privileged phenomenological experiential information that an omniscient being could not have about each one of us. And that limits the information that an omniscient being could know. And so there could, in fact, not be an omniscient being because he wouldn't be able to know everything. So again, omniscience is impossible. So I've shown three ways in which omniscience is impossible. It is physically impossible for any being in the natural universe. It is mathematically impossible to know an infinite number of things. And it is impossible for any being to fully know what it's like to be another being. So an omniscient being could not fully know what it's like to be me or to be you. So for these considerations, we have to conclude that omniscience is in fact impossible. And that means if God is supposed to be omniscient, there is no God. Now you might want to argue that God could be non-omniscient. You could argue for a non-omniscient God. And if you can figure out how that works, you could try to explain it to me. You've been watching For the Love of Wisdom, a YouTube channel on philosophy, free thought, and critical thinking. Thank you for watching, and go check out some of my other videos.